Absolutely. Morning, everybody.
Morning.
The title of my testimony is God is Faithful. So, the first thing I want to tell you is that I'm not a reformed serial killer,
Thank God.
nor did I run a multi-million-dollar drug ring. Haven't robbed any homes, so I don't have anything really dramatic like that to tell you. So if that's the kind of testimony that you wanted to hear today, I'm going to close my eyes and you can just sneak out and then my feelings won't be hurt. So now's your chance. Okay, it's over. So you're stuck here at this point in time. Yeah. So my name is Rosemary, by the way. And I was born on October 28th, 1955. I was the third child of Byron and Isabel Fowler, who were 40 years old when I was born. And my two sisters were 9 and 12 years old when I was born. So I'm the baby of the family by a long time. I was born about 10 days before I was actually due. So my dad had taken my two older sisters down to southern Indiana to spend the weekend with our grandmother, I think probably to get out of mom's hair for a little while. And so my Uncle Charlie got word that I had been born, and he was so excited that he went to the movie theater in Oakland City where my grandma and my sisters were, and he went into the theater and he went running down the aisles yelling, "It's a girl, it's a girl, it's a girl," in the middle of the movie. So as I was growing up, I came to the realization that if there was ever a person in this world that should have had a boy, it was my dad. And I always wondered, was he disappointed when that third girl came? Because my dad loved to hunt and fish, and he was a tool and die maker. He could design or build anything. When he was 72 years old, he built the house that he and mom lived in the last years of their life. So he was someone who really should have had a boy to pass that, pass all that knowledge on to. So I always wondered, gosh, was he disappointed? And then when I was probably in junior high, Dad and I were talking one day, and he said, are you misbehaving, Becky?
No.
I'm sorry. Becky and I are roommates. It's enough said.
I'm sorry.
So Dad and I were talking one day, and he said, he in the conversation, he said, I really would like to have had a son, but I just don't know which one of my girls I would have traded for that boy. Now, I personally had a couple suggestions. But that put my doubts or my questions to rest. So I grew up in a middle-class family, 3 kids, south side of Indianapolis. Nothing really too unusual there. But my summers were very unusual. Due to circumstances that I'll talk about a little later, my mom and dad, when I was just a baby, decided to buy an island in province of Ontario and start a hunting and fishing resort. And so from the time I was 9 months old until after I graduated from college, so age 23, I spent every summer of my life up on this island. And mom and dad and I ran the hunting and fishing camp. It's the best thing that could ever happen to a person. I have so many wonderful memories of that place. I can still visualize every square inch of that 6-acre island, and met so many wonderful people, and still have friends that were folks that came up there. So just a great experience. So when mom and dad bought this island, there was one little 1-bedroom cabin on it. And over the next 23 years, it grew to be 8 cabins, which my dad built. And we were really our own little city. We made our own electricity. We pumped our own water. We did everything that you needed to have a comfortable vacation. So it was really quite a unique place. And over the years, we welcomed thousands of people that came and had great vacations and made memories with their friends and their families. So a lot of times it was me and my dad doing projects. I was what he called the gopher. I would go for this
Right.
and I would go for that.
Right.
He would tell me, now I need this wrench and I need this particular kind, and I think it's here. So I would run to wherever it was, and I would do my darndest to find this particular wrench. And if I wasn't sure, I might take 2, or I might go back and no, that wasn't what he wanted. And so he'd explain it a little better, about what I was looking for. And then I'd go find it, and then he'd continue on with his repair or whatever. So you may be wondering, why am I talking so much about my dad in my testimony? Well, as I said at the beginning, I'm not a serial killer or any other kind of, what do I want to say, huge sinner. Yes, I'm a sinner. We will get that out here. But I didn't have a dramatic conversion. My experience was the people in my life that influenced me and modeled Christ to me. And I'm talking a lot about my dad because my dad was one of the major people that influenced my life to follow Christ. Now, I can honestly say, I don't ever remember my dad telling me that he loved me. But I knew I was loved. I didn't have any doubt about it. And sometimes I kind of wonder, in this day and age, it seems like every time we talk to someone on the phone or we send them a text or we do anything, we tack on, love you. And I think, that's nice, but do we do it so much that it just becomes rote that we don't really think about what it means? I don't, like I say, I don't remember ever being told, I love you, but I knew I was loved by my dad's actions, by him modeling Christ to me. One of my favorite memories as a kid with my dad, and I could spend hours telling you many different things, but one of the things that Dad and I did several times a week that was so precious to me was that after we ate dinner, he would get an apple or an orange out and a section of the newspaper, and he'd sit on the couch and I'd sit right next to him, and he would peel that apple or the orange, and he would cut it into sections, and he'd line the sections up in a nice row, and then he and I would eat the apple or the orange. And that was special to me because that was something that just Dad and I did together. So I say that, I know none of us here have young kids at home now, but I think most of us have some young kids in our lives, whether it's grandchildren or nieces or nephews or whatever. So I say that to encourage you, we don't have to spend money on kids to show them that they're loved. We just have to get an apple or an orange out and spend 10 minutes just with them to make them feel that they are loved and precious to us. So my mom and dad and I, we went to church every Sunday. That was a priority in our lives. Now, during the summer, we weren't able to go to church because we worked 24/7 at the hunting and fishing camp, taking care of people. But when we were home, Sundays, we were at church. So in addition to my dad, there were a lot of folks in the church that I grew up in that were pivotal in mentoring my curiosity about God and my desire to follow him. And with each of those people, my second grade teacher, who I babysat for years, my adopted grandma and grandpa, Art and Pearl, Becky, I think you remember them. The one thing that was common to all these people is that they didn't necessarily talk about God all the time, but they mirrored and they lived out God each day in their lives. And that was what drew me to accept God as my Lord and Savior. So by all rights, I shouldn't even be here. When my dad was a young kid, he grew up in southern Indiana, and he was swimming in a lake or a river with a bunch of kids. And I don't remember exactly what happened, but Dad got scared or whatever. Anyway, he started drowning. He went down under the lake, and a guy by the name of S. Hugh Dillon saved his life. Now, S. Hugh Dillon went on to become a southern Indiana judge and a legislator. But his pivotal part in my life was saving my dad's life.
Yeah.
And then when my dad was 23 years old, my grandpa, who owned a double cola bottling plant in southern Indiana, had gotten sick. And my mom and dad were married at that point, and they had moved to Indianapolis, but they moved home back to Petersburg. So Dad took over the double cola bottling plant while Grandpa was sick. So there was some particular machine in the double cola plant that they had lost the key to. So my dad, being a tool and die maker, got some iron, and he heated it up, and he was forging a new key for this machine. And he struck the hot iron, the tip of it, with a hammer. And this was before safety glasses. And the tip broke off, and it flew up into his eye. And so the local doctor and my grandpa drove my dad 40 miles to a hospital in Evansville. And the doctor sat in the back seat with my dad, and he just cradled Dad's head in his arms. And they were amazed. The staff at the hospital were amazed when they got there. The doctor says, "I don't know how this man is still alive." By all rights, when that red hot piece of iron broke off and went flying up into his eye, he says that piece should have just kept boring through his skull until it destroyed his brain, but he's alive. So Dad did lose the sight in that eye. And that was why he and Mom decided a few years later to start the hunting and fishing resort, because he needed some kind of occupation that got him away from the very close tool and die work that he did all the time. So fast forward here, I graduated from high school, I went to college, and I became a nurse. And I got a job at IU Health after I graduated. I worked for Blue Cross Blue Shield under its various names. And then I became a case manager. And so at one point, I got a job as a case manager. I was really excited about it because it was a fairly new company, a fairly small company, and owned by a Christian. And I thought, oh, this is going to be good. Well, it was for about 2.5 years. And then due to some loss of some business, it became necessary for the owner of the company to downsize one position in our office. And so she made the announcement that the newest employee in our office would be losing her job. And that was not the problem. The problem was she didn't want word to get around that the company had lost business. So instead of telling this particular nurse's clients that, you know, we had to redistribute that workload because we had to downsize a position, et cetera, et cetera. No, she did not want us saying that. she wanted us basically to lie to the clients and put the responsibility onto this particular nurse for her leaving the position. Well, there were several of us in that office that were Christians, and we were all really bothered about this. So we went to the owner of the company and we said, we understand what you're wanting us to tell our clients, but we're just really not comfortable. That's really not the real truth. So we offered an alternative. Can we tell them this instead? The answer came back, no, we could not. Well, I really grappled with that, because what she wanted us to tell our clients really put this person who had lost her job in a very negative light. And I couldn't handle that. So I was grappling with this issue, what to do, because we'd reached an impasse. The owner was not going to change her mind. And if we were not going to lie for her, then she says, there's the door. Okay. Well, I had made plans the following weekend after this happened to go up and visit some Christian friends of mine in South Bend. And I was really hoping that Lee and Evelyn would give me some direction. So I told them what was going on. They didn't give me any direction. Oh, crud. So on Sunday that weekend, we went to their church, and I still didn't have any answers about what I was going to do. So the pastor gets up in front of the congregation, and he catches my attention when he says, I want to talk to you today about standing up for what you believe in. I'm going, okay, you have my attention. And then he reads this passage out of Daniel 3. King Nebuchadnezzar made an image of gold 90 feet high and 90 feet wide, and set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. He then summoned the satraps, prefects, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all other provincial officials to come to the dedication of the image he set up. So the satraps, prefects, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all the other provincial officials assembled for the dedication of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up, and they stood before it. Then the herald loudly proclaimed, "This is what you're commanded to do, O peoples, nations, and men of every language. As soon as you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipes, and all kinds of music, you must fall down and worship the image of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. Whoever does not fall down and worship will immediately be thrown into a blazing furnace." Therefore, as soon as they heard the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, and all kinds of music, all the peoples, nations, and men of every language fell down and worshiped the image of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. At this time, some astrologers came forward and denounced the Jews. They said to King Nebuchadnezzar, "O king, live forever. You have issued a decree that everyone who hears the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipes, and all kinds of music must fall down and worship the image of gold. and that whoever does not fall down and worship will be thrown into a blazing furnace. But there are some Jews whom you have set over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who pay no attention to you, O king. They neither serve your gods nor worship the images of gold you have set up. Furious with rage, Nebuchadnezzar summoned Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So these men were brought before the king, and Nebuchadnezzar said to them, "Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the image of gold I have set up? Now, when you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipes, and all kinds of music, if you are ready to fall down and worship the image I made, very good. But if you do not worship it, you will be thrown immediately into the blazing furnace. Then what God will be able to rescue you from my hand?" Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to the king, "O Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to save us from your hand, O king. But even if he does not, we want you to know, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold you have set up." Then Nebuchadnezzar was furious with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and his attitude toward them changed. He ordered the furnace heated up 7 times hotter than usual and commanded some of the strongest soldiers in his army to tie up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and throw them into the blazing furnace. So these men, wearing their robes, trousers, turbans, and other clothes, were bound and thrown into the blazing furnace. The king's command was so urgent and the furnace so hot that the flames of the fire killed the soldiers who took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and these 3 men, firmly tied, fell into the blazing furnace. Then King Nebuchadnezzar leaped to his feet in amazement and asked his advisors, "Weren't there 3 men that we tied up and threw into the fire?" They replied, "Certainly, O king." He said, "Look, I see 4 men walking around in the fire, unbound and unharmed, and the 4th looks like the son of the gods." Nebuchadnezzar then approached the opening of the blazing furnace and shouted, "Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out, come here." So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out of the fire, and the satraps, prefects, governors, and the royal advisors crowded around them. They saw that the fire had not harmed their bodies, nor was a hair of their heads singed. Their robes were not scorched, and there was no smell of fire on them. So I left the church that day, and my friends Lee and Evelyn looked at me and said, "We think you have your answer, don't you?" Yeah, I do. So I went back to work and I handed in my resignation. And that was a pretty tough thing to do, being a single person, no other income, no other job. But I had a peace about it. So altogether, I was out of work for 5 months. But God really worked some neat things while I was out of work. I started a small cleaning business that helped pay the bills. I had loaned a relative some money they were able to repay. So at the end of 5 months, when I went back to work, I actually had more money in my savings account than the day I left my job.
Aw, really?
Now that's God's economy.
Yes.
So in 1995, because of this job that I wound up resigning from, I moved from the south side of Indianapolis up to Carmel. And when I moved up here, I knew that I would not stay involved in my church on the south side because it was just too far away. So I moved up here and I had a long list of churches that I knew about. I'd had friends that had gone to, I knew were great churches. And so I'm thinking, oh, it's not going to be any problem finding a new church. And so each Sunday I went to one of the churches on my list, and each Sunday I walked out going, yep, that was a church. And you know what? I went through my whole list, and that was not supposed to happen. And it's like, ooh, Houston, we have a problem. One of these churches was supposed to be it. So it's like, okay, what do I do now? So I was talking to a gal that went to the church that I had left on the south side. And she said, well, you know, where you live? And I told her, and she goes, well, have you tried Church at the Crossing? And I said, no, have never heard of it. She goes, well, it's real close to you. It's okay. So the next Sunday, I trotted off to Church at the Crossing. I walked into the doors of this church and I looked around and I felt God saying, Rosemary, you're home.
Wow.
And that was 27 years ago.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So about 8 years before my dad passed, he developed Alzheimer's. And if any of you have dealt with family members or close friends that have had Alzheimer's or dementia, you know, it's pretty rough. It changes the person. And my dad was such a kind and gentle soul. Now, I don't mean he was a wimp, because don't you dare mess with any of his 3 girls.
Right.
But he was a kind, gentle soul that if it was within his power to do whatever you needed, it was done. But Alzheimer's, unfortunately, did change him, as it does all people with dementia. So as his disease progressed, he needed more and more care, and he and mom and dad were, you know, in their 90s. And so about 8 years of my life was spent continuing to work, but also managing mom and dad's finances, their medical needs, and spending time, especially the last 3 years when dad got to the point that he really could not be left alone, and mom simply couldn't. She couldn't monitor his behavior by herself. So he required 24-hour-a-day care. So my life was work and drive back to the south side and take care of dad and come back and work and then do it all over again. So dad finally passed from Alzheimer's. And, you know, we as all families went through the, okay, now what do we do with mom? And so mom, my nephew and his family moved into mom and dad's house to take care of her. And after about 9 months, that was not working real well. My niece or my nephew and his wife had 2 young kids who precious, but they were little boys. And, you know, you have a 90-year-old woman who's not used to having little boys around. So we moved mom into assisted living. That worked for about a month. And then, as we found out later, wasn't immediately, mom had a mild stroke. And so she went into rehab. And then the question was, okay, where's she going to go after rehab? Because assisted living was not an option any longer. And I remember very vividly going to visit her one day and thinking, you know, they've done a really good job here in rehab. You don't need to be here any longer. And then, okay, still don't have that answer of where you should go. And the thought had crossed my mind of having mom come live with me. But it's like, oh no, not doing that. No. I just have spent 8 years taking care of dad, and you know, I'm just kind of getting my life back, and no, we're not doing that. Not gonna happen. And then God got a hold of me, and he changed my attitude. And I went from mom cannot come live with me to mom has to come live with me. And so she did. And she lived with me for the last 18 months of her life. And I wouldn't trade that for anything because my mother was happy in those 18 months. And when my dad had been diagnosed with Alzheimer's, one of the things that I said to myself, and one of the things that kept me going the years that he had Alzheimer's, was that I said, when dad is gone, I want to be able to look back and say, I did everything I could for him. And God said, okay, Rosemary. So you said that about your dad, but that's not good enough for mom? Whoa.
Ouch.
Talk about conviction. So mom came to live with me along with her funeral suitcase. The funeral suitcase had been the bane of my existence for about 20 years.
Oh, geez.
Because my mother, bless her heart, she just didn't want to be a burden to anyone. So she had written her dad's obituary. She had written her obituary. She had rewritten them multiple times. And then there was the matter of what they were going to be buried in. And again, she didn't want to be a burden, so she got this old suitcase and she put clothes in it. And these were clothes that were set aside for her and dad to be buried in. Now, there was one problem with this. There is no way either of them were ever going to be buried in the clothes she put in that funeral suitcase. Because my mother was a penny pincher. And if the fabric on something hadn't totally disintegrated, you could still wear it. And to make matters worse, she changed the funeral outfits out with the seasons.
Jeez, just in case.
And when she did this, then we would all have to go through the funeral suitcase again.
Yeah.
So about every 4 to 5 months, she'd pull this funeral suitcase out and we would go through it. And we did this for 20 years. And then the funeral suitcase came to my house and it's like, oh, no. So one day, it's about probably about 6 months before Mom passed. I was fixing dinner one day. And she was in the kitchen. She was sitting on a rollator, and we were just talking. I had my back to her, which was a very good thing because she says, "You know that funeral suitcase?" And I rolled my eyes. I was like, "Oh no, the funeral suitcase." But I very calmly, since I had my back to her, said, "Yes, Mama." She goes, "There is just not a thing in that suitcase I would wear."
Oh, jeez.
And I'm going, "Really?" I said, "Well, I have some ideas. Let me work on this, Mom." So I formulated this plan that I was going to go shopping, and I was going to find a dress for Mom to be buried in. Now, okay, there were parameters. She did not like collars. She did not like long sleeves. So it had to be collarless, short sleeved, but it couldn't be sleeveless because she never wore sleeveless. It's like, okay, I'm up to this. So, and it couldn't cost much because we're talking about the original penny pincher. So a few days later, I went to J.C. Penney, and I thought, I'm just going to walk through the department that has Mom's size in it and see if I find anything. Well, lo and behold, I look off in the distance and I see this sign that says, "Everything on this rack, $9.99. And I'm thinking, great. So I go over there and I go through her size, and I found this gorgeous dark blue dress, short sleeves, no collar. It had seed beads on it. It had been real expensive, and it was $9.99. So I grabbed that dress and I went home. And after dinner, I said, "Hey, Mom, you remember you were talking to me about the funeral suitcase the other day?" "Yeah, there's just not anything in there I want to be buried in." I said, "Well, I think I found the answer." So I went into the closet and I got this dress out and showed it to her, and her eyes lit up. She goes, "That's the most beautiful dress I've ever seen. But you paid too much for it. I know you did." And then I showed her the tag that said $9.99. And I got the Child of the Year award. And that's the dress she was buried in. So I know this has kind of been rambling and we're getting on here, but I just wanted to share, God works in our lives in different ways. And these particular instances that I've talked about today are times when I felt like God really spoke to me. And I won't say it was audible, but I knew that it was God's voice. And the last time that happened, which is on October 28th of this year. No, last year. Sorry. We're in 2023 now, aren't we? So October 28th, 2022 is a day Becky and I will never, ever forget. It was my birthday. And a good friend of mine and Becky's had asked to take us out to breakfast. Her birthday is a couple weeks before me, so we were going to celebrate both our birthdays. And we had a wonderful time. And as fate or God, I don't know which, I still haven't quite figured that out. Instead of our house being vacant while we were gone, a friend of mine was there who had had an 88-year-old friend of hers airlifted from Terre Haute to Methodist for treatment, and she had come up to spend the night with us so she could be at the hospital with her friends. So she was at our house while we went out to have breakfast. And we had a lovely breakfast, and my phone rings and I answer it, and my mind will never stop hearing the words of that friend scream into the phone, "Call 911, Rachel has shot herself." Rachel was Becky's niece, who had a lot of problems in life, and we knew was really struggling with bipolar disease. And she had gotten into our house, and she got Becky's gun and she fatally shot herself. So Becky and I raced home to find 2 fire trucks, an ambulance, 5 police cars in our neighborhood. And the first thought, no, not the first thought. One of the thoughts that went through my mind as my mind raced many, many different directions all at once was, are Becky and I going to be able to continue living in this house? And I felt God telling me, yeah, you're going to be able to live in this house. Because when you built this house, you had friends and family write scripture all over the studs of that house. And that surrounded Rachel when she shot herself. And there's been a lot of love and a lot of laughter in this house. And you two are not going to let what happened here today destroy all that. So those are 3 incidents where I really so strongly felt God just directly talking to me. And wow, what an amazing experience. So, the last few months we have been held up by calls and texts and cards and friends and so much faithfulness with this class and our neighbors and our friends that aren't in this class. So God is faithful. God is faithful. And I'm going to leave you today with my life verse that I adopted many years ago, that I actually have above our fireplace in our house, Jeremiah 29:11. For I know the plans I have for you, says the Lord, plans to prosper you, not to harm you, plans to give you hope in the future. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing with us today. Always great to hear somebody's story, isn't it?
Yeah.
And how God is alive and working in our lives. Let's have a word of prayer and we'll turn you loose. Dear Lord, thank you for your goodness to us once again. And thank you for Rosemary's story and these times when you have spoken to her through very challenging times, through very good times, through times where we're just scratching our head and saying, why in the world did this happen? But you're always there. You're the constant in our lives, and you're the one who helps us to walk through times. And we just thank you for your intervention into our world, into our hearts. And we just pray that you would watch over us this week as we go into what we don't know about, but you do, and we trust you. We ask this in your name. Amen.
Amen.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rosemary.
You're welcome.
Good stuff.
Yeah.
And I knew most of that, but the way she told it, it was like,
Kind of an
that's
unusual.
awesome.
But I hope you enjoyed it.
Thank you, Rosemary.
Well-
Okay, so what's Jeremiah's needs in this situation?
So, you know, he's kind of.
Oh, do you?
Was it his idea?
Okay.
So you have like
Gas bypass idea, right?
Yeah.
And he says that, you know, I'm not gonna be able to. So he's resigned himself to.
There you go.
We have an interesting relationship. I call him lazy sometimes. He says,
It's
you're
tough
always
love.
keeping it real. I said, I know.
Tough love, yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway,
I
so
long to.
they got done with him.
Yeah.
This is over on Cold Springs Road, just south of Maryland University.
Oh,
West side. So Alpha Home or something.
Thanks for doing
He's
this.
been there,
Come back sometime. You know where we're at?
ever since his 1 week stint in Methodist when he
Okay.
initially.
Yeah.
And initially, if you remember, he was feeling really bad, so he calls 911. They come and they risk him off to Methodist. He stays there for a week. He had C. diff,
okay.
which is very infectious. Gown up and go in to talk to him. So that last week. Then from there, he went to this rehab. So they rehabbed him, physical therapy, walking, and just the guy weighs 550 pounds.
Yeah.
So she,
And probably was up to 575 at that.
Okay.
And no wonder his body was getting.
Yeah.
At age 28,
Uh,
he just turned 28 or 29.
okay.
The 12th of December. So, physical therapy, and I think he said he lost 100 pounds. Yeah. But when you think back in Methodist, a lot of that was water weight too. So, who knows?
Yeah.
So he loved being in the hospital because he was just in bed, didn't have to do anything.
Yeah.
He could do what he wants.
Yeah.
He loves the rehab.
So I don't know what time.